The rope burns on Aiyana's wrists had stopped bleeding, but they still pulled tight every time she breathed. 3 days bound to this cottonwood, 3 days of Garrett's men circling like buzzards, and still her chin never dropped. When the tall one with the gold tooth leaned close enough that she could smell the whiskey rot on his breath, she met his eyes with the steady gaze her grandmother had taught her. The look that said death might take her body, but it would never touch her spirit. "Ain't you gonna beg yet, squaw?" Goldtooth spat tobacco juice that spattered near her feet. "Boss said he'd take good money for you in Tombstone. Pretty little thing like you'll fetch a fine price." Aiyana said nothing. In the Apache way, silence was strength, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, because she knew what waited in Tombstone. She'd seen other women sold there, seen the hollow look in their eyes when the bidding was done. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to Usen that her death would come before that shame. 4 miles northwest, Jack Sullivan reined his horse to a stop on the ridge overlooking the Dos Cabezas Mountains. The October sun painted the desert in shades of copper and gold, but he barely noticed the beauty anymore. Beauty was something you shared, and Jack had been alone for going on 3 years now. He'd built his ranch with his own hands after the war ended, thinking Sarah would come west and marry him like they'd planned. Instead, he'd gotten her letter, the one that still sat folded in his shirt pocket, edges worn soft from handling. "I cannot live in such wild country, Jack. I have accepted Thomas Weatherby's proposal. He has a fine house in Boston and prospects that don't involve Indians or outlaws." Thomas Weatherby, a banker's son who'd never worked a day in his life, never felt the satisfaction of building something from nothing. But he could give Sarah safety, society, all the things Jack's 2,000 acres of rangeland couldn't provide. The ranch thrived now. His cattle brought top dollar. His horses were sought after from Phoenix to El Paso. But success felt hollow when you ate dinner alone every night, when the only voice you heard was your own talking to the horses. At 32, Jack felt like an old man, worn down not by hard work, but by the endless quiet of solitude. He'd ridden out today to check the eastern boundary, but really he was just escaping the emptiness of his house. The wind carried a faint sound. Voices, maybe? Jack stood in his stirrups, squinting into the afternoon glare. There, in the grove of cottonwoods by Willow Creek, smoke rose from a small fire. Travelers, most likely. This was open range and folks passed through regular. But something about the scene below made his jaw tighten. The smoke was too small for a proper camp, and he counted at least 4 horses, but only one figure sitting by the trees. The others were moving around restless-like, and one kept looking north toward the main trail as if watching for something. Jack had learned to trust his instincts during the war, and right now every instinct screamed that something was wrong. He touched the colt at his hip and nudged his horse down the rocky slope, staying low and using the mesquite for cover. As Jack drew closer, the voices became clearer, and what he heard made his blood run cold. "Take her to Tombstone tomorrow. Garrett's got a buyer lined up. Some fancy man from California who likes his women exotic. Said he'd pay extra if we keep her unmarked." "Shame to waste her on some rich man's perversion," another voice grumbled. "Pretty little thing like that'll fetch a fine price. You touch her before the sale, and Garrett will skin you alive," Goldtooth warned. "He's got big plans for this one. Says Apache women are worth their weight in silver to the right buyer." Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. Through the screen of brush, he could see her now, a young woman bound to a cottonwood tree, her long black hair falling across her shoulders. Even at this distance, he could see the proud set of her chin, the way she held herself straight despite her bonds. They were selling her, like cattle, like property. The rage that filled Jack's chest was clean and bright, the same righteous fury that had carried him through Antietam and Gettysburg. Some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, and human dignity topped that list. 3 men, 4 horses, all of them armed, but relaxed. They weren't expecting trouble out here in the middle of nowhere. Jack's Winchester held 15 rounds, his Colt 6 more. If he was smart about it, if he used surprise. He studied their positions. Goldtooth sat closest to the woman, cleaning his fingernails with a hunting knife. The other two lounged in the shade, one dozing with his hat over his eyes. Their rifles leaned against a fallen log 10 feet away, too far to reach quickly. Jack had faced worse odds at Bull Run. He crept closer until he was 30 yards out, close enough to put 3 shots center mass before they knew what hit them. He found his trigger, and for a heartbeat he hesitated. He'd killed men before, in war, but this felt different, personal. The woman turned her head slightly, as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met across the distance. Hers were dark as midnight, full of pain but unbroken. In that gaze, Jack saw something he'd forgotten existed. Real courage, the kind that didn't bend even when breaking seemed merciful. She didn't cry out, didn't give him away. She simply watched, waiting to see what he would choose. Jack chose justice. The first shot took Goldtooth in the chest, spinning him backward before he could draw. The second man scrambled for his rifle, but Jack's next bullet caught him in the shoulder, sending him tumbling behind the log. The third, the one who had been dozing, rolled sideways and came up with his pistol drawn, but Jack was already moving, using the cottonwoods for cover. "Who's out there?" the wounded man shouted. "Show yourself. Let the woman go and ride out. Don't come back this way. Our horses." "Take 2, leave 2. Jack kept the rifle trained on them as they stumbled toward their mounts. "And mister, if I hear Garrett's name connected to slave trading again, I'll come looking for him. You tell him Jack Sullivan said so."
The 2 outlaws rode north without looking back, one swaying in his saddle from blood loss. Jack waited until they disappeared over the ridge before stepping into the clearing, Winchester still ready. The woman watched his approach with those steady dark eyes, and he found himself slowing his steps, suddenly uncertain. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 22 or 23. Her doe-skin dress was torn at the shoulder, and dust streaked her copper skin, but she held herself with a dignity that made Jack feel clumsy and oversized. Rope burns circled her wrists like angry bracelets. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. The words felt foolish. "What did you say to someone you'd just rescued from slavery?" "I'm going to cut those ropes now." She nodded once, a small, precise movement. When Jack drew his knife and approached, she didn't flinch, though he noticed her breathing quicken slightly. The ropes were thick hemp, crusted with dried blood where they'd bitten into her skin. "This might hurt," he warned, sliding the blade carefully between rope and flesh. "I am not made of glass," she said quietly. Her English carried only the faintest accent, her voice lower and more musical than he'd expected. The ropes fell away, and she rubbed her wrists, wincing slightly. Jack stepped back, giving her space, but she swayed on her feet, and he instinctively reached out to steady her. "Easy there." His hand touched her elbow, and she went rigid. Jack jerked his hand back as if burned. "Sorry, you looked ready to fall." 3 days, she said, more to herself than to him. She flexed her fingers, working feeling back into them. 3 days tied to this tree. The quiet fury in her voice made Jack's chest tight. "They're gone now. You're safe." She looked at him then, really looked, taking in his sun-weathered face, his calloused hands, the careful way he held himself just out of reach. "Why? Why what?" "Why did you help me? I am Apache, your people and mine." She gestured vaguely, encompassing generations of conflict in that small movement. Jack considered the question. The easy answer was that it was the right thing to do. No person should be bought and sold like livestock. But standing here looking into her dark eyes, he realized there was more to it. Something about her courage, the way she'd faced death without begging, had reached a part of him he'd thought Sarah's letter had killed. "Because you're a person. and people shouldn't be treated like property. She studied his face as if looking for deception, then nodded slowly. I am called Aiyana. Jack Sullivan. He touched his hat again. I've got a ranch about 4 miles west of here. You're welcome to... He stopped, suddenly aware of how that might sound. A white man inviting an Apache woman to his isolated ranch. I mean, you could rest there, get cleaned up. I could take you wherever you need to go. Where I need to go. Aiyana's laugh held no humor. My village was burned 2 months ago by soldiers. My family is dead or scattered. I have nowhere to go. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd known the army was still fighting scattered Apache bands, but somehow he'd assumed she had people waiting for her somewhere, worried about her safety. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. That's a hell of a thing. War is a hell of a thing, she agreed. Your people and mine have been at war since before I was born, yet you risked your life for me. Why should I trust you now? It was a fair question. Jack thought about Sarah's letter, about his empty house, about the loneliness that had been eating at him like a slow poison. Maybe because we've both lost things we can't get back. Something shifted in her expression, not trust exactly, but a recognition that he wasn't lying to her. Your ranch, it is far from other white settlements? Far enough. Nearest neighbors are the Hendersons, about 8 miles south. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing options he couldn't guess at. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. I will come with you, for now. The ride to Jack's ranch took 2 hours, most of it in silence. Aiyana rode the gentlest of the outlaw's horses, sitting straight-backed despite her obvious exhaustion. Every few minutes, Jack caught himself glancing at her, struck by how naturally she moved with the horse's rhythm. You ride real well, he said finally, when the silence grew too heavy. Apache children learn to ride before they walk. It is necessary for survival. Your English is real good, too. Better than most. He caught himself before he said Indians, realizing how that might sound. Better than most Apache. Her tone was dry, but not hostile. I was educated at the mission school in Tucson for 3 years, until my father decided white learning was corrupting me. He was not wrong. Why's that? Because it taught me to want things that Apache women are not supposed to want. Books, ideas, the right to speak my mind to men. She looked at him sideways. Your Sarah, she spoke her mind to you? Jack jerked in surprise. How do you know about Sarah? You said we have both lost things we cannot get back, and there is a sadness in your eyes that speaks of a woman. Also, you handle yourself like a soldier, but you live alone on a ranch. A woman chose safety over adventure, perhaps. The accuracy of her guess left Jack speechless for a moment. You see a lot. I see what is there. It is another thing the mission school taught me, to watch and listen. White people reveal much when they think no one is paying attention. They crested a low hill, and Jack's ranch spread out below them. The adobe house he'd built with his own hands, the corrals full of horses, the barn where he stored hay for the winter. It wasn't much compared to the grand houses back east, but it was his, every board and brick of it. It is beautiful, she said quietly, and Jack felt a surprising flush of pride. Built it myself after the war. Took 3 years to get it right. Point to the windmill spinning lazily in the afternoon breeze. That well goes down 60 feet, never runs dry even in drought years. You are proud of it." "I am." Jack surprised himself by admitting it. "Sarah thought it was too crude, too isolated, said it wasn't fit for civilized people." "And what did you tell her?" "That civilization was what you made it, not what others gave you." He glanced at Aiyana. She didn't agree. They rode into the yard as the sun touched the western mountains. Jack's horses nickered from the corral, and his dog, a grizzled cattle dog named Blue, came trotting out to investigate the visitors. Blue took one look at Aiyana and wagged his tail, apparently deciding she passed muster. "Smart dog," he said. "He doesn't like many people." Aiyana slid down from her horse with fluid grace, though Jack noticed she favored her left side. Those rope burns needed tending, and she probably hadn't eaten in days. "The house isn't much," he said, suddenly self-conscious about his bachelor quarters. "But it's clean. You can rest there while I tend the horses." She nodded, then paused at the porch steps. "Jack Sullivan." "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you." The words felt simple, but the weight behind them made Jack's throat tight. "You don't need to thank me for doing what's right. In my experience, few men do what is right when it costs them something." She looked back at him, and for a moment her careful mask slipped, revealing exhaustion and pain and something else, a fragile hope she was afraid to acknowledge. "You could have ridden past that camp, most would have." Before he could respond, she disappeared into the house, leaving Jack standing in the yard with his heart hammering against his ribs. Blue whined softly and pressed against his leg, as if sensing his confusion. What was happening to him? This morning he was a lonely rancher checking his boundaries. Now he had an Apache woman in his house, and her quiet gratitude affected him more than Sarah's passionate letters ever had. Inside the house, Aiyana moved carefully through the main room, taking inventory. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by shelves lined with books. Real books, not just almanacs and catalogs, but volumes of poetry.
Jack found Aiyana asleep in his chair when he came in from the barn, her head tilted back, dark lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. In sleep, the careful mask she wore fell away, revealing exhaustion deeper than he'd realized. He moved quietly to the kitchen, starting coffee and slicing bread and cold beef for sandwiches. The small sounds woke her. She sat up with the instant alertness of someone accustomed to danger, her hand moving instinctively to where a knife would hang at her belt. "Easy," Jack said softly. "Just making some food. You must be hungry." She relaxed slightly, though her eyes tracked his movements. "I should help. You should rest. When's the last time you ate?" "Before they took me." She stood carefully, working stiffness from her joints. 4 days, maybe 5. Jack's jaw tightened. 5 days? And they'd planned to sell her like livestock? "Well, we'll fix that right now." He set a plate before her. Thick slices of beef, fresh bread, butter churned that morning. Simple food, but her eyes widened slightly at the abundance. She ate slowly, with the careful control of someone who'd known hunger. "This beef," she said after a few bites, "it is very good. Raised it myself. That's prime. My best bull's offspring." Jack poured coffee into 2 cups, adding sugar to his own. "You want sugar? Milk?" "Black, please." She accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "You live here alone?" 3 years now." Jack settled across from her, trying not to stare at the graceful way she moved, even exhausted and hurt. "Used to think I'd have a house full of kids by now." "Children are a blessing," Aiyana said quietly. "In my village, I helped care for my sister's babies. Before." She trailed off, pain flickering across her features. "Your sister, was she—" "Killed when the soldiers came." Aiyana's voice stayed level, but her knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. "Her children, too. Little ones, barely walking." The stark words hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd heard stories about army raids gone wrong, civilians caught in crossfire.
but hearing it from someone who'd lived it made his stomach clench. "Christ, I'm sorry." "War makes monsters of good men," she said simply. "Apache warriors have done the same to white families. Grief and anger make people forget their humanity." The quiet wisdom in her voice surprised him. Most people, white or Apache, spoke of the conflict in absolutes, good versus evil, civilization versus savagery, but Aiyana saw the tragedy for what it was, human beings destroying each other over land and fear and misunderstanding. "You don't sound bitter," he observed. "Bitterness is a poison that kills the one who carries it. My grandmother taught me that. She said anger could fuel justice, but bitterness only bred more bitterness." Smart woman. The wisest I ever knew. She would have liked you, I think. "Why's that?" Aiyana was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because you act from your heart, not your fear. When you saw those men holding me, you could have told yourself it wasn't your problem, that Apache troubles weren't worth a white man's life, but you didn't think that way." "How do you know what I thought?" "Because you're sitting here talking to me like I'm a person, not a problem to be solved." She set down her cup, meeting his eyes directly. "Most white men would have freed me and sent me on my way with a clear conscience. You brought me to your home. You're feeding me from your table. Why?" It was a fair question, one Jack had been asking himself since they'd ridden through his gates. The easy answer was Christian charity, helping someone in need. But watching Aiyana in his kitchen, seeing how she moved through his space with quiet grace, he knew it was more complicated than that. "Maybe because I've been alone too long. Maybe because talking to you is the first real conversation I've had in months." Something shifted in her expression, maybe surprised that he'd admitted his loneliness so directly. "You miss her. You're Sarah." "I thought I did." Jack stared into his coffee, realizing the truth as he spoke it. "But sitting here with you, I wonder if I was missing the idea of her more than the woman herself." "What do you mean?" "Sarah never really saw me. She saw what she wanted me to become, a gentleman rancher with a fine house in town, connections to proper society. She never understood that this place, this life, it's who I am." He gestured towards the windows, where twilight was painting the mountains purple. "She thought the ranch was something I did, not something I was." "And what am I to you?" The question was asked quietly, but Jack heard the weight behind it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, at the intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing, the proud set of her shoulders despite everything she'd endured, the way she'd eaten his food and drunk his coffee without once acting grateful or subservient. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I'd like to find out." The admission hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. An Apache woman and a white rancher, in this time, this place, such connections were more than forbidden. They were deadly. "The nearest town is Wilcox, 20 miles east," Aiyana said. "If people see me here, let me worry about people." Jack's voice carried more conviction than he felt. "This is my land, my choice who I welcome here. Your choice perhaps, but not without consequences." She stood, moving to the window. In the gathering darkness, the mountains looked like sleeping giants. "There will be talk, questions. Some will say you're harboring a hostile." "Are you? Hostile?" She turned to face him, and in the lamplight her beauty was almost startling. Not the delicate prettiness white society prized, but something deeper, strength and intelligence, and a core of steel that no amount of suffering had been able to break. "I am a woman without a people, without a place in either world. That makes me dangerous in ways your neighbors will not understand." "How so?" "Because I have nothing left to lose, and because being here with you feels like coming home to a place I've never been." The honesty of it took his breath away. He stood, moving towards her, then stopping when he realized how small his kitchen was, how close they suddenly were. Close enough to see the pulse beating in her throat, to smell the faint scent of sage in her hair. "Aiyana," he started, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. "I should go," she said softly. "Tomorrow, when I'm rested. It's not safe for either of us if I stay." "Where would you go?" "South, maybe. Into Mexico. Find what's left of my people, if any survived." The thought of her leaving, of riding alone into a country torn by revolution and war, made Jack's chest tight with panic. That's a hell of a dangerous journey for a woman alone. More dangerous than staying here with you? Her smile was sad but knowing. At least in Mexico, no one will hang me for loving the wrong man. The word hung between them. Love. Neither had spoken it, but both had felt it growing like a flame in the dark. Impossible, dangerous, but undeniably real. Who says it's wrong? Jack asked quietly. Your law, your society, your God, according to the mission priests. My people, too, would call it betrayal. I am caught between worlds that want nothing to do with each other. Jack moved closer, near enough now to touch her if he dared. What do you call it? Hope, she whispered. And I haven't felt hope in a very long time.
They might have stayed frozen in that moment forever, two people balanced on the edge of something that could destroy them both, if Blue hadn't started barking outside. Not his usual welcome bark, but the sharp, urgent sound that meant strangers approaching after dark. Jack was at the window in 2 strides, rifle in hand. 3 riders coming up the lane, moving slow but deliberate. In the moonlight, he could make out the glint of badges on their chests. "Sheriff's men," he said quietly. "Get away from the window." Aiyana melted into the shadows by the fireplace, her movements liquid and silent. "They're looking for me." Maybe, maybe not. But Jack's gut told him otherwise. Word traveled fast in this country, and a gunfight near Willow Creek wouldn't stay secret long. "There's a root cellar behind the kitchen, stone door hidden under a rug. If things go bad, I won't hide in your cellar like a criminal. You'll hide if it keeps you alive." Jack's voice was harder than he'd intended. "Promise me." She nodded reluctantly, and Jack felt a surge of relief. He set the rifle by the door and stepped onto the porch as the riders approached. "Evening, Jack." Sheriff Tom Morrison dismounted, his 2 deputies flanking him. Morrison was a fair man, but political. He couldn't afford to ignore complaints from prominent citizens. "Tom, kinda late for a social call." "Wish it was social." Morrison's eyes swept the porch, taking in details. "Got a report about some trouble near Willow Creek this afternoon. 3 men shot, 2 wounded. You know anything about that?" Jack kept his expression neutral. "Heard some shooting while I was checking fence, figured it was hunters." "Hunters, huh?" Ben Collins, a thin man with nervous eyes, stepped forward. "Funny thing about hunters, they don't usually leave rope burns on cottonwood trees or blood trails leading north." "Ben Collins, you always were too smart for your own good." Jack's tone stayed light, but his hand drifted closer to his sidearm. "What exactly are you boys looking for?" "Apache woman," Morrison said bluntly. "According to the survivors, she was being held by Garrett's men when someone ambushed them, killed 1, wounded 2 others." "Garrett's men?" I let surprise color my voice. "They're slave traders, Tom, you know that." "What I know is that they're white men, and someone shot 'em up pretty good," Morrison's voice carried warning. "Now, the wounded men say their attacker was a lone rifleman. Good shot, knew the country. That sound like anyone you know?" Jack met the sheriff's eyes steadily. "That sounds like half the men in this territory. We all fought in the war, Tom. We all know how to shoot." "Maybe so. But you're the only one lives out this way, Jack, and you got a reputation for—" Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. For having strong feelings about justice. "If you're asking whether I'd stop men from selling human beings, the answer is yes. But I haven't seen any Apache woman, if that's what you're getting at." It wasn't technically a lie. He hadn't seen her when Morrison asked, but the sheriff's eyes narrowed, and Jack knew he wasn't convinced. "Mind if we look around? Just to be thorough." Every instinct screamed at Jack to refuse. A man's home was his castle, and no law said he had to let them search without a warrant.
But refusing would only make them more suspicious, and Morrison was the type to come back with a federal marshal if pushed. "Help yourself," Jack said, stepping aside. "But try not to track mud on my clean floors. I just mopped." Morrison and his men moved through the house methodically, checking rooms, looking behind furniture. Jack followed, his heart hammering every time they came near the kitchen. Aiyana was still by the fireplace, invisible in the shadows, but if they looked too hard— "Nice place you got here," Collins observed, running his finger along the bookshelf. "Real homey. Must get lonely, though, living way out here by yourself." "I like the quiet," Jack replied. "Bet you do." Collins picked up one of the coffee cups from the table, Aiyana's cup, still warm. "You entertaining tonight, Jack? 2 cups here, and this one still got heat in it." Jack's blood turned to ice, but he kept his voice steady. "Had a neighbor stop by earlier. Mrs. Henderson brought me some preserves." "Mrs. Henderson." Collins set the cup down, smiling like a cat with cream. "Funny thing about hunters. We passed the Henderson place on our way here. Talked to Ed about some missing cattle. He mentioned his wife's been laid up with fever for 3 days. Hasn't left the house all week." The silence stretched taut like a guitar string. Morrison was watching Jack carefully now, his hand resting on his gun butt. Behind them, the other deputy had moved to block the door. "You want to try that again, Jack?" Morrison asked quietly. Jack's mind raced. He could fight. He'd killed 3 men today. What were 3 more? But that would make him an outlaw, and Aiyana with him. They'd never stop running, never have a moment's peace. Or he could surrender, let them take her, try to work through the law. But Garrett had connections, money, influence. An Apache woman's word against white men in court— she'd be lucky to see a trial before she was sold south. "Tom," Jack said carefully, "what exactly do you plan to do if you find this woman?" "Turn her over to the territorial authorities. Let them sort out the legal issues." "And in the meantime?" Morrison's hesitation told Jack everything he needed to know. They'd hold her in jail, or worse, turn her over to Garrett's people as a material witness. Either way, she'd disappear. "I see." Jack nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. Then he raised his voice slightly. "Aiyana, you might as well come out. They know you're here." She emerged from the shadows like smoke taking form, moving with that liquid grace that made even the deputies stare. In the lamplight, her beauty was undeniable, but so was her dignity. She stood straight and proud, facing the 3 armed men without a trace of fear. "Gentlemen," she said politely, as if greeting guests at a social gathering. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Morrison. I need to ask you some questions about what happened at Willow Creek this afternoon." "I will be happy to answer them. Those men were holding me prisoner, planning to sell me in Tombstone. Mr. Sullivan rescued me." "That's quite an accusation, miss. You have any proof of these claims?" Aiyana held up her wrists, showing the rope burns. 3 days I was tied to that tree. 3 days they spoke of the price I would bring." Collins stepped forward, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made Jack's hands clench. "Even if that's true, we got white men shot up pretty good, and that's a serious matter." "More serious than slavery?" Aiyana's voice stayed level, but Jack caught the flash of fire in her eyes. "Now see here," Collins started, but Morrison cut him off. "That's enough, Ben." The sheriff studied Aiyana carefully. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us, at least until we can sort all this out." "No," Jack stepped between them, his decision made. "I'm under my protection." "Jack, don't be a fool. You can't fight the law." "What law?" Jack's voice carried 3 years of frustration, of watching good people suffer while men like Garrett prospered. "The law that says it's illegal to sell human beings, or the law that says a man can't protect innocent folks on his own land?" The law that says you can't harbor a hostile Indian. She's not hostile. She's not even armed. Jack's hand moved to his sidearm. But I am. The deputies tensed, but Morrison held up a warning hand. He'd known Jack since the war, knew he wasn't a man to bluff. Think about what you're doing, Jack. You shoot us, you'll have every lawman in the territory hunting you. Is she worth that? Jack looked at Aiyana, standing straight and proud behind him. In her eyes, he saw not just the woman she was, but the woman she could be, the life they could build together if they were brave enough to fight for it. Yeah, he said quietly, she is. Morrison sighed heavily. I was afraid you'd say that. He stepped back, his men following his lead. I'm going to pretend I never found her here, Jack, but you need to understand, this won't end with us. Garrett's got friends in high places. He'll be back. Let him come. And if he brings federal marshals, army troops? Jack's smile was cold as winter wind. Then he better bring a lot of them. Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing the finality in Jack's voice. You're a good man, Jack Sullivan. Always have been. But good men can make bad choices when their hearts get involved. Maybe, but some things are worth making bad choices for. After the lawmen rode away, Jack...
1 year later. The sound of horses approaching no longer made Jack reach for his rifle. These were familiar hoofbeats. Ed Henderson bringing his monthly order of supplies from town, probably with news and gossip tucked into his saddlebags like contraband. Jack set down his hammer and wiped sweat from his forehead. The new barn was nearly finished, twice the size of the old one. Amazing how much work a man could get done when he had something to build toward, instead of just something to maintain. "Jack," Ed called out as he dismounted, "got your supplies and some news you might find interesting." "Good news or bad news?" Jack asked, though Ed's grin suggested the former. "Depends on your perspective. Garrett's dead." Jack's hand stilled on the saddle he'd been repairing. "How?" "Tried to bushwalk a cavalry patrol near Tucson. Seems he'd expanded his operation, started stealing army horses along with everything else." Ed shook his head. "Soldiers didn't take kindly to it. Found him full of holes 3 days ago." Good riddance. Jack felt no satisfaction in the news, only relief. One less threat to worry about. "There's more. That federal judge in Phoenix, the one who'd been making noises about investigating your situation, turns out he was taking money from Garrett all along. Got himself arrested last week for corruption." Jack looked up sharply. "What's that mean for us?" "Means the heat's off, mostly. New territorial governor issued a statement about protecting all citizens regardless of race or background. Political winds are shifting, Jack. Folks are starting to realize the Indian wars are ending, and maybe it's time to figure out how to live together instead of killing each other." Before Jack could respond, Aiyana emerged from the house, a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. The sight of her never failed to make his heart skip, not just because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of the quiet contentment that had settled over her like morning sunlight. "Mr. Henderson," she said with a smile, "how is Mrs. Henderson's fever?" "Much better, thanks to that tea you sent over. Martha's been asking when you might visit again." Jack watched the easy exchange with satisfaction. It had taken months, but gradually the neighboring families had come to accept Aiyana, first out of respect for Jack, then for her own quiet kindness and practical wisdom. She'd helped birth 2 babies, nursed 3 families through influenza, and taught half the women in the valley how to make soap that actually worked. "I'll ride over tomorrow. I have more of that willow bark tea prepared." Ed nodded, then glanced between them with the expression of a man carrying interesting news. "Speaking of visits, you two might want to think about making one to town soon." "Was that, Jack?" Ed called out as he dismounted. "Got your supplies and some news you might find interesting." "Good news or bad news?" Jack asked, though Ed's grin suggested the former. "Well, it seems Father Miguel's asking questions about when you two plan to make things official. Says it's been a year, and while he understands the complications, he thinks it's time you had a proper wedding." Ed's grin widened. "Martha agrees with him. So do most of the other wives, from what I hear." Jack felt heat climb his neck. People been talking? Of course they have. This is ranch country. Talking's about the only entertainment we got. But it's good talk, mostly. Folks respect what you two are built here. Ed gestured toward the expanded corrals, the new barn, the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. "Place looks like a real homestead now, not just a bachelor's camp." Aiyana set down her basket and moved to Jack's side, slipping her hand into his. The gesture was natural now, unconscious, but it still made his pulse quicken. "We have talked about it," she said quietly, "but marriage between Apache and white, the laws are complicated." "Laws change," Ed said simply. "Love doesn't. And if you're waiting for the perfect time, you'll be waiting forever." After Ed left, Jack and Aiyana walked to their favorite spot on the ridge overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple that never failed to take their breath away. "What do you think?" Jack asked. "About what Ed said?" Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, watching an eagle circle high above them. She said, "I think that I spent too many years being afraid of what other people might think or do, and you spent too many years being lonely because you were waiting for someone else to make you happy. And now? Now I think we should stop waiting for permission to live our lives." She smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Ask me, Jack Sullivan." "Ask you what?" "You know what." Jack's heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Aiyana, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, raise children with me, build something that lasts?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." When he kissed her this time, it was with the knowledge that they'd chosen each other not just once in a moment of crisis and passion, but again and again through all the small dailiness of shared life. They'd chosen each other when the neighbors whispered, when the law threatened, when the easy thing would have been to give up. They'd chosen love over fear, hope over safety, and each other over the whole disapproving world. As they walked back toward the house, their house, the evening star appeared above the mountains, bright and steady in the darkening sky. Tomorrow they would ride to town and speak to Father Miguel about a wedding. Tomorrow they would begin the next chapter of their story. But tonight they had this, the ranch that they'd built together, the love they'd fought for, and the quiet certainty that some things were worth any risk, any sacrifice, any struggle. Some things were worth everything. The end.